Hello and thank you for taking the time to review this short video about competence evaluation logs. My name is Simon Dukes. I'm a director at CSR Scientific Training, and over the course of the next few minutes I'd like to give you an update and some information about what the competence evaluation logs are and what apprentices can do and what you can do as managers and supervisors to help the process along. So firstly, I'd like to give you some information about what science standards or apprenticeship standards look like. So some of you will already know this information. You may have seen other videos, so I'll go through it relatively quickly. So firstly, there's an initial assessment which you can expect for your staff to have to undergo, which helps the training provider to understand the level of literacy and maths that that individual has had or possesses, and allows us to accommodate them and offer additional support where necessary. Once the program is fully underway, the on-program elements would be the on-the-job training, the development of that competence and knowledge that you would help them to achieve by training programs and training interventions, doing proficiency tests and learning the standard operating procedures. We would also then help build its competence evaluation log and a behaviours log. You may have seen a separate video to this discussing that, but if you haven't, go and watch that one. And also, as a training provider, we would also deliver the technical certificate or the academic qualification. Once all of those elements are completed and we're fully happy that everything is where it should be, then we have this final gateway to make sure that all of those elements have been completed before moving on to the endpoint assessment. The endpoint assessment, depending on the level or the apprenticeship type that that individual is doing, would consist of three main areas. There's a synoptic assessment test, which is either in the form of an observation of that individual in the laboratory or in the production area, or it could be for the level 5 qualification, almost like a technical viva about the final project that they've done for you in their final 12 months of their program. After that, there's a professional discussion where a conversation is had between this independent assessor and the individual. And then finally, a scenario-based case study, which is where we look for their ability to apply what they've learned to unfamiliar settings. Once all of that has been completed and the individual has finished all of the on-program elements and the endpoint assessment, then they have finally completed. And that might take somewhere around 24 months for a level 3 program or around 36 months for a level 5 program. So, competence evaluation logs. These are essentially taking the place of what we'd normally have as a traditional national vocational qualification or NVQ within the apprenticeship. It's been designed by employers, by trailblazer employers over the last couple of years, and it should be more focused on the skills and knowledge that you would need to have developed within your staff to do that particular job for your organisation and team. So at level 3, the apprenticeship, you would expect them to go through, there would be 15 core elements for them to evidence within this evaluation log, and that would be for the laboratory technician program. There would be 12 core elements to evidence within the science manufacturing technician program, and then at level 5 there would be 21 core elements to evidence. Now, along with those, there are numerous other elements that those individuals would need to have evidence of or knowledge of in order to complete their apprenticeship programs. These core elements have been designed to be the absolute key, fundamental competence areas for that particular standard. Okay, so it is the combined responsibility of you as managers and you as apprentices, depending on who's listening to this, and also us as the training provider to develop the correct level of competence, skill, and understanding throughout the whole of that program. So the evidence that you can collect and the type of evidence that you're looking at developing will depend on what you're trying to evidence. Is it a competence? Is it an understanding or knowledge element that you're looking at developing evidence for? So there are a number of different ways in which you can do this. Firstly, there would be through direct observation, and that can be the observation of you as supervisors or managers, or as us as nominated assessors, where we would observe that apprentice in the workplace carrying out their fundamental duties and activities. We could have professional discussions, so again asking questions teasing out the right responses and understanding the level of knowledge that that individual possesses. As apprentices, you could develop learner statements, so you can talk about the training that you've had, the understanding that you've developed, and the competence that you have gained over the months or weeks of your apprenticeship. There could be expert witness, so a manager, a supervisor, or another member of staff, a senior scientist, could write down some information about what they have observed or seen that individual do. And it could be behavioural, it could be to do with proficiencies and standard operating procedures, or health and safety elements of their apprenticeship standard. Then, of course, we can have workplace documentation or work products. So these are the types of authentic pieces of evidence which really testify to the fact that an individual has carried out a process, whether it be a batch of medicines that's been developed, it could be some tests that have been carried out, and the results of those. Obviously, we wouldn't expect any confidential information in these. Those can be redacted, and we'll of course talk about that and discuss that with the individuals at the time. So it's really important that we understand exactly what these development interventions would be over the course of the apprenticeship standard. So it's important that as managers or supervisors, you help the apprentice to develop a plan that will help them achieve the correct level of skills at the correct time during their programs. So there's no particular need to develop certain skills at a particular time, either sooner or later, but we would suggest, as I'm sure you would agree, that health and safety elements being fundamental would probably be high on your list in your development plan or program. So the details of the competence that's within the standard. So if we take laboratory technician as our first example, and what I've done here is just chosen 5 of these core elements, almost at random, just to show you what that feels like, what it looks like within this competence review. Of course, as I email out to you, each manager or supervisor or apprentice, this information, you'll have the full list of all of these different competencies in front of you from the start. So firstly, work safely in a lab, maintaining excellent housekeeping whilst following appropriate safety environment and risk management systems. Now, I'm not going to read all of these out, but we'll go through the 5 for the laboratory technician. So we've got a range of different things, and of course there are more than just these. But what I've tried to do, and you can read through that as I'm talking, is pull out what really is the main points within those 5 to give you an example. So we would expect the apprentice to be able to work safely in their environment, to understand and follow quality procedures that are set by your quality team through audit and through other processes that you put in place in your standard operating procedures. We would expect them to be able to prepare for the tasks that they're carrying out, that they will be able to correctly perform those laboratory tasks following the SOPs, and that they would understand your business, the environment you work in, and certainly the ethical practices or codes of conduct that you would expect all your staff to follow. These are the types of competencies that we're talking about. In the science manufacturing technician standard, we've got slightly different types of competencies as you would expect. So again, I've chosen 5 of these. And the core elements of these, the things that really stand out for me, are that the individual would need to be able to start up a manufacturing batch in line with appropriate SOPs. They'll be able to operate manufacturing batches or continuous processes in line with those procedures, shut them down or complete the run, again with SOP in mind. Of course, work safely in that environment and understand the quality procedures and the requirements of your standards that are relevant to your company and your sector. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour for those. And then finally at level 5, the laboratory scientist standard, you can see that these are slightly more involved. There's slightly more independence and project research in mind for these types of competencies. So I'll bring the 5 up. Again, you can read through those. Press pause if you need to. But again, I've pulled out what I feel are the main points within these 5 to give you a bit of a flavour for it. So the application of knowledge at this level, that they're learning new things all of the time and that they're using that knowledge in the workplace and applying it appropriately. Next would be the demonstration of that individual for the principles and be able to explain the principles of techniques, but certainly contribute to the development of technical projects. Next, apply theoretical knowledge and advanced science and technology required in their job role. Number 4, demonstrate working knowledge of project management procedures. You'd expect that to be fundamental at level 5. And also in the laboratory scientist standard, we would expect them to work autonomously, to be able to analyze, interpret, evaluate scientific data, and of course, communicate that effectively to the staff around them. Okay, so how are we going to go about collecting the evidence? I've told you that there are different ways, and you can see them listed across the top, from observation, professional discussion, through to learner statements. We would expect the individual to write out the evidence. They can cut and paste images in, they can scan documents to PDF, and they can cut and paste those into these documents and then link them to the competence. So we'd also need those documents to be signed by the individual, by a witness, which could be an assessor, a nominated assessor from CSR, or it could be a manager, a supervisor, or a senior scientist in that working environment. So to give you a bit of an insight to what that might look like if it was completed. So they've mocked one up here, and you can see at the top we've put a cross next to observation and also a cross next to professional discussion. This is just to highlight the fact that it doesn't need to be a single piece of evidence, that often the best pieces of evidence cut across those different types. So there might be more than one tick or X put next to the type of evidence that we're looking at. On the left-hand side, in the link to the competence here, for this particular one, which is taken from the Science Manufacturing Technician Standard, we've talked about competence element number 19, understand and comply with the foundations of health and safety. And we've put that next to the evidence. So in this terms, an observation and a bit of a discussion with the individual about health and safety in the environment, about reading through the health and safety processes for any visitors, having them signed in, and making sure that they understand the need to log any accidents or incidents on the health and safety system under the legislation RIDDOR 2013. The next one is a core competency. You can see that it's core because it's in bold. So in this case of the 12 core competencies, this one is about independent or within a team to start up the manufacturing batch or that process, and again some evidence from the observation that's been carried out by the assessor. Okay, so once that's done, again it needs to be authenticated, so there needs to be signatures that are attached to those documents by both the assessor, in this case the witness, which was the assessor, was me, the learner involved in this person, in case this person Paul Smith, and obviously the date. So that would just be scanned and then uploaded to the right place online. So what we will do in terms of progressing the competence evaluation log as a really important element of their apprenticeship standards is that it would help them to develop a really full and well evidenced log. We'd work with you as supervisors or managers to identify the best types of evidence for each type of element that is listed in that log, and we would of course help the individual upload those forms and the evidence to the one file site, which is our online portfolio. We'd obtain your final sign-off that you're happy that all of the elements in the competency log is fully evidenced and completed before we get to the endpoint assessment. So you would be the person or the individual that signs that off for the apprentice, and then we would direct the endpoint assessor to those documents for review during the endpoint assessment process. So what can you do to help? Well, communicate the plan of how you're going to develop your apprentice so that they're able to create the correct type of evidence at the right time. You could help by creating witness testimony from them and adding evidence to their portfolio, which would obviously add authenticity to the evidence they're gathering. Review their progress. Make sure that they're online and that they're developing appropriately and in line with the competency log, and be supportive. So what next? Well, a copy of the competence criteria will be sent over to you and obviously to your apprentice staff as well. The nominated assessor, whether it's from your team or whether it's from CSR Scientific Training, we would aim to sit down with the apprentice every 8 weeks for a formal review, and that gives us an opportunity to start to develop the right type of evidence for their logs, to look through the different types of standards and those different elements to make sure that we're getting strong evidence to put forward for their endpoint assessment review. Finally, if you have any questions with this at any point, you can contact us on this central number or email us at the help desk. Those individuals, your response will help you to find the right information or the right person to make sure that any of your questions are properly answered. So thank you for taking the time to review this video. Hopefully that's shed some light on the process. But as I say, any other questions, please get in touch and we'd be happy to help.